Hi, Sheena. I'm trying to accept your. There we are.
Hey Zara.
Hi, Sheena. How are you?
I'm all right. I'm all right. Yeah, how are you?
All right. We're all just moving through things.
Yeah, that feels very real.
Yeah. I
hmm
am excited to talk to you again today. How are you?
I am also really excited to talk to you again. I feel like it's been one of those weeks where I was like, there's something I'm forgetting that I know is on my calendar. And and the way it kind of just like, you know, came up, I was just like, okay, yes, that's happening, and I'm really looking forward to the workshop. I feel like I've been hearing from folks across the pond who said that they signed up. And I know we created this time so that folks in other countries can be able to attend. So I'm really looking forward to connecting with folks in these times uh, and using yoga as just one way to talk about decolonization and the importance of it.
Yeah, yeah. And I think obviously I felt your workshop was needed and necessary in the last year when we did it. And I'm sure you've been doing work like that for a while, but yeah, to just see where we are today and the ways in which understanding washing and understanding decolonization beyond representation and identity politics, I think is really important. And I'm excited that you have that to offer. So, what would you like to start with today?
What would I like to start with? I mean, I think that right now it just feels like it feels like a really important time to have this conversation, and it also feels like um so much is being stripped, like our hearts are being stripped, right? As we watch images of an actual colonial entity or colony um barbarized, like completely barbaric, brutal, horrific, vicious images of babies being slaughtered in the name of imperialism and for because of anti-Arab sentiment. And so I do want to say that I think, that has been front and center on my mind. Just like the past couple days, it's like we've reawakened to a new arm of this genocidal reality. And and I think that um, you know, the work of washing was born actually out of Yogis for Palestine being founded, right? Like when at the time that Yogis for Palestine was founded, when me and a comrade of mine, Sonali, founded it, it was really through witnessing the way in which colonial entities such as the Israeli army were using yoga, and it was founded around recognizing the ways in which yoga is used by Hindu nationalists and the Indian army, and that specific alliance of Zionism and Hindu nationalism. And I think that um, if I were to think about like what do I want to focus on, it's really just about like relocating our focus as people who are committed to decolonization and decolonizing yoga, and really thinking about how identity politics has this way of like um, dominating the conversation when in fact when in fact we focus on identity politics, or when we focus on cultural appropriation, like I just don't think we make any gains in actually being able to challenge these imperial, state violent, um, colonial entities, right? And I think that as if we are to be yogis who are courageous in challenging decolonization, I I just want us be to be bolder and more committed, because I think there's just so much at stake, in this moment for all of us to be bolder and more courageous in taking revolutionary action, and I think even using these practices towards, um, collective healing, and liberation. I know that's a lot, and I know I'm coming with heaviness. Um, yeah, or just like a depth.
Yeah. Yeah, and I wouldn't say heaviness because I mean, while subject matter might be heavy, this is the world we are living in. This is a thing we cannot escape. It is happening every day all around us. We're watching it on our phones. We're not watching it on the news. That's a whole different thing to get into. But you know what I mean? Like, yes, the topic might feel heavy, but how do you get through something if you can't sit with it, you know? And
Hmm.
I think one quote that we did reuse and I really loved from your work was about how, we get taught through decolonization work or like in decolonization work, a lot of it is just, oh, that person who's wearing a bindi who's not South Asian, versus what is what are these authoritarian armies using yoga for and how is that actually causing more harm? So I would love maybe if you, without getting too much into it, because I would love people in the workshop to be able to get into it, but how how does your work and what you have to offer through this workshop or training have to move beyond what is like the everydayness or like the more representative or identity politics based issues compared to uh, your decolonization practice as a value, a way of being, a practice off your mat. What is the difference there?
I'm trying to unpack your question. Um, but I think I'll just try and like focus a little bit on like, yeah, like what you said is like what might be the value of my decolonizing yoga offerings. Um and you know, I think that the value of really talking about decolonizing yoga in this way that puts the focus on um imperial armies or that puts the focus on authoritarianism is that of course like we are living in this fascist moment, and I think that um I think being anti-imperialist is one of the most important ways that we can really actually combat like this moment that we're living through, right? And I think that what that means is to really recognize that yoga is this cultural tool and it's a tool that serves many people. And I think that because we often laud or like romanticize yoga in these ways, that maybe we hold it to this kind of value that, like anyone who uses yoga is going to be automatically a good person, or anyone who practices yoga is going to promote peace. And I think that um by actually recognizing yoga as a cultural tool that is not necessarily inherently good, right? It's a tool that actually can be used for good or it can be used for harm, because it can make you better at whatever you think your purpose is in life, right? And so if you are in an army and you're in an occupying army and you are taught to do yoga to relieve stress or to handle your PTSD, if you aren't taught yoga in this way that interrogates the harm that you are committing or the ethnic cleansing that you're committing or the colonial occupation that your army is perpetrating, then your yoga is actually going to make you better at advancing that occupation or at killing and ethnically cleansing a population. Um, and I think that often the focus in decolonizing spaces is, um, especially living in the West, it can feel really hard, I think, to see yoga become so co-opted and commodified by maybe people who don't have a lineage or connection to this ancestral practice, right? So if they aren't South Asian, or if, you know, they're profiting off of yoga in a way that feels particularly kind of altruistic in a way, I think it can definitely feel um, like that's a hard reality to sit with. And I think in some ways that, and I'm not against that being criticized, right, or looked at in a critical way. Um, but I think when we only focus on that, and as someone who comes from an upper caste Hindu family, right, if I'm unable to look at the ways in which um yoga is being promoted or yoga has been used in harmful ways by my own families, or by my own lineages, or by my own caste, and by my own people in the name of Hinduism, then I think that it just can it can just be a dangerous road to walk down. Yeah. And so I think that the decolonizing yoga offerings that I've kind of curated and put together, I would hope can actually just help us build a more structural analysis that can, off the mat, help us think about, like, why is it important in this moment to show up for Palestine? Why is it in this moment important for us to talk about Kashmir and the Hindu nationalists and Indian states' occupation of Kashmir? And why is it important for us to talk about how, US police officers take on these yoga and meditation programs? And while some might say, like, oh, this is their way of working on implicit bias, or this is their way of relieving stress, right? That's often like the media headlines, right? uh, I think it's important for us to think about, like, why is it important that decolonizing yoga also has this abolitionist analysis, right? Where we say, no, we don't actually care if cops do yoga. What we would prefer is if communities were given access to collective healing practices, if communities had the resources to be able to um, support each other and meet their basic needs, instead of being uh, policed by racist cops.
Yeah. I have a question then. Would you say that the a lot of the current framework around decolonization focuses on individual versus systemic? Because that kind of seems like the difference, and maybe I'm missing it. So I'm curious of what your thoughts are.
Yeah, I do think a lot of the framework does focus on individual rather than systemic. Um, yeah, I mean, I think I definitely agree that it does. And I think that, because I don't know if it's just cultural appropriation, right? Um, as a framework that is focused on individual, but I think in general in the US, the way in which we are taught to talk about race is often as, focusing on individuals, or focusing on individual harm, or on microaggressions that people commit, which, again, it's not as if that doesn't hurt, right? When you experience a microaggression. Um, but I think when the focus is on an individual versus on structural and systemic conditions, then it leaves out um, an ability to think about solutions that are also going to systemically change and transform people's material conditions to be able to think about healing um, as a society. Yeah, or about like ending capitalism would actually promote decolonizing yoga more so than ending cultural appropriation, right? Um, yeah.
Yeah. I love the intricacies of how your work is tied in and like how you do bring out the pieces of like you can't have decolonization without an abolitionist perspective. You can't have these things without taking out the imperialism, without fighting the capitalism. Um, is there anything you feel surrounding that or surrounding your work that you want to share or talk about in this moment?
Um, yeah, I guess, yeah, one of the things that I guess that I've been kind of toying with or trying to like write about lately, or maybe it's like two projects that I've been really just trying to figure out and write about a little bit, have been this one piece about the work of yogis for Palestine, right? And not in this way to kind of like talk about, oh, yogis for Palestine is so great, but to really think about like what does it mean to archive um instances of international solidarity and think about how we can grow from here. Um, and I, I think one of the things that I've been trying to think about is what does the practice of transnational feminism look like? Um, what does the what is the value of our yoga work being international in this moment? And so I've been trying to work on this piece on just kind of archiving a bit of Yogis for Palestine's work, some of the efforts that we did in the last year and a half around, you know, fundraising for families in Gaza, fundraising for um, organizations that have been working to advocate for people's rights to protest, to free speech, to not be attacked or to not be discriminated against in the United States for standing up against genocide. Um, and I think some of the yoga offerings, like the intention of them, like why did me and a fellow organizer who had been working with Yogis for Palestine, Anika Anwar, like why did we feel like it was important to not only create a space where we were holding space for people to grieve, as they were showing up for actions, right? Like, why did we feel like it was important to create this sustaining space for people? Like, why was it important to actually grieve together instead of in our isolation? And how does that help us continue to be able to show up, right? And so that's one kind of piece I've been trying to really think through and my hope is actually that I get to like talk to people who have experienced, whether it was in-person programs or, the program that we did virtually with abcdyogi this time last year, was a really powerful way to connect with other uh, yogis, mostly in the US, I guess, but also around the globe. Um, so that's like one project that I'm just kind of like thinking about. As I'm also kind of thinking about like recognizing the burnout of people in this moment, and yet the need for us to show up in new and different ways, whether that's Yogis for Palestine, kind of like you know um creating a container again for people to kind of work through their healing and grieving as we continue to think about what is needed in this moment to really stand up to power. Um, yeah, and then I think the other piece that I'm kind of toying with or writing out right now is a piece on looking at um, media coverage of uh, Israeli trauma in the last year and a half, and how media talks about Israel's obsession with or fascination with yoga. And so I'm looking at that in like three different ways. And I think that is a piece about like how is yoga, this practice that we perceive as purifying, or this practice that we perceive as like healing. How does the media talk about mainstream media talk about Israeli trauma, and how does mainstream media talk about Israeli fascination with yoga? And that piece is kind of like right now it's being kind of broken down into like three categories of looking at this one hostage um, who unfortunately was murdered um, in September, who was found in one of the tunnels, right? But it's actually unclear as to, a lot of fabricated Israeli evidence says that she was murdered by Hamas. But I'm really intrigued because she was a yogi, and she was supposedly a yogi who taught yoga to other hostages. And I'm interested in how the media kind of constructs this image of her as this guardian angel. But the media also kind of doesn't really look at what was she somebody who served in the IDF, which according to Israeli law, she would have had to have served in the IDF. Um, but like, what is the way in which media can kind of contributes to creating this image of her and other hostages as victims while neglecting to mention any Palestinian hostages, right? And because she's a yogi, how does yoga kind of become used in this way to kind of continue to victimize uh, Israel? And so I'm interested in that. There's another component of that essay that's kind of looking at how yoga is used to heal Israeli soldiers um, through their PTSD, and kind of just looking critically and analytically at some of the ways in which uh, um, yeah, like during this 17 months of genocide, 17 and growing, right? Months of genocide, like how is mainstream media, it's well documented how mainstream media is complicit in just covering Israeli war crimes and refusing to acknowledge Israeli war crimes. But in what specific way is yoga and spirituality, are they also being used to kind of uh, make Israel innocent or make Israel a victim?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
Mhm.
I'm excited to learn more about that, but I do think, I mean, the idea of like passive and active voice in the conversation between in the news, what's happening in Israel, Palestine, Gaza, you know what I mean? I think is something that's already like become more of the mainstream conversation around the way that it's being discussed. And I think it's so fascinating to see the influence of the way yoga is impacting both how it's talked about and how the Israeli army and its, what is the
I
people
said
who make it up?
fascination.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Oh, okay.
Yeah. No, I
The
think it's
soldiers.
fast. Yeah,
hmm
I think it's interesting because even as I can hear you talking about it in my mind, like of like the media painted eye, I'm seeing like the whitewash image, you know what I mean? Where like it's pure. See, they're getting healed, they're being cleansed, and it's like, ooh.
hmm Yeah, and cleansed at the like it's like they're reclaiming their humanity. I think a lot of the media talks about that. They're reclaiming their humanity, but it's not like they're suddenly humanizing Palestinian bodies, right? Or Palestinians as a population, or reckoning with
Right.
um,
Well,
the war crimes.
and I think that really brings in a question of like, how possible is it to claim your humanity or reclaim your humanity if you don't see other people as human?
Mm, yeah, yeah. Thanks for saying that. Yeah, that's an important component. Hmm.
Yeah. Um, so yeah, we have more of this conversation coming up in the training that's happening on April 5th and 6th, right?
Yay! Absolutely. Yeah. And I know today felt maybe a little focused in on particular threads of that conversation, but I think a thing that I always really look forward to in this workshop is just how it can also be particular to anyone uh ancestral, right? Like, I think all of us have, ancestral work that we can honor and that we can do in the work of decolonizing yoga. And so I also look forward to connecting with individuals. I think when these workshops happen, it's always really sweet to get to connect with folks. And I know it's this time around we extended it by 2 hours, which I think will just give us a little more time to actually connect with each other. And so I'm looking forward to that, and to everyone who chooses to join.
Yeah, absolutely. I think 2 hours is the minimum addition we needed for that because for last training it was so good, but it was so a lot in a small period of time. So I'm excited.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Sarah.
Thank
I
you.
look forward to it.
Thank you, Sheena.
Yay.
See you soon.
Yep. See you soon. Take care.
Bye.
Ciao.